Hi, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and today we are making mushroom mead. Well, I know you think I lost my mind, but trust me, a mushroom mead is not going to be a bad thing at all. So another YouTube channel made a mushroom wine a while back, and I tried the recipe, and it was honestly an awesome wine. So I played with the recipe a little bit, added different varieties of mushrooms, saw what really popped out in the wine, and I'd have to say one of the things that really kept sticking out is some honey characteristics would really make the whole wine pop. So I said, so why not make it a mushroom mead? And before you pull back and say, yeah, but that's mushrooms, and I don't like mushrooms, and mushroom wine sounds gross, and mushroom mead can't be good. Mushroom wine does not taste like mushrooms at all. It's actually a delightful wine that tastes very similar to a Chardonnay. A nice, crisp, sweetish white wine, very light, very drinkable. So a mead has to be great, right? So that's the inspiration behind this particular brew. So why don't we get brewing? So to start our mushroom mead, we're going to need 3 kinds of mushrooms. I have shiitake, oyster, and button mushrooms. We're going to cook the button mushrooms. We're not going to cook the shiitake or the oyster mushrooms. This is going to be in there for a little bit of flavor. You're also going to need honey. I have a local honey. This is about 20 minutes from my house. If you can get something local like that, get something local like that. If you can't, get what you can from the store. And then I have 1 cup of black tea, still very hot. And we're going to start cooking our mushrooms. To cook our mushrooms, keep in mind, I'm not adding any oil to this pan. Oil would stay in the pan, stay in the mushrooms, and stay in your wine, and nobody's going to drink an oily wine. If your mushrooms are sticking a little too much and you need to loosen them up, use some of the tea. Simple, right? Let's cook our mushrooms. Now we got our mushrooms nice and cooked down. Really all we did was give it a quick saute. You want to build up a little bit of caramelization on the mushrooms. More importantly, you want them to release all that liquid inside of them. Brown up a little bit. They're perfectly cooked, they're good. So now we're going to try to assemble our meat. So now, assembly. Today we're going to do something a little different. I have a brewing bucket. You haven't seen me use one of these before, but they are perfectly usable. This is sanitized. Everything going into my brew is sanitized at this point, except for the food, of course. But any equipment I'm going to touch has been sanitized, including my hands. Alright, so first things first. For this recipe, I'm mimicking a 1-gallon batch. So when I rack this off into secondary, it's going to go into a 1-gallon fermenter. However, there's a lot of mushrooms here, and if I put all of that into a 1-gallon fermenter, it's going to take up a lot of space, and we're not going to get quite as much product as we want. If you're going to make a mead, which means you're going to use honey, honey's expensive. You want to get as much product as you can out of the actual fermentation, which is the only reason I'm going with a bucket today. How much honey are we going to use today? We're going to use 3 pounds. But I'm not going to make you watch me pour all of it. So once all your honey is in the bucket, next big thing we're going to do is add the water. Now I'm not adding a full gallon of water. I'm actually adding about 3/4 of a gallon. And the reason for that is, again, I'm making a 1 gallon batch. I have already calculated what gravity I want out of this. And if I add a full gallon of water right now, this is going to be more than the gallon of product at the end, which isn't going to fit in our carboy and defeats the purpose. Now, unfortunately with a bucket, you have to stir your honey with a spoon. There's no shaking, there's no fast way around it. There are attachments you can buy for a drill and beat it up, but I like to just use my arms. You know, why not give yourself a little bit of a workout? So you ever almost instantly regret saying something? The arms method is a little tough. You are going to have to mix this for a few minutes. You're not going to be able to stop. Honey's not going to want to mix with the water all that well. But really, do your best to get as much of it incorporated as possible. Here's the thing. There's large clumps of honey in the bottom of this bucket. The yeast is still going to eat it. The problem is, if there's large clumps of honey in the bottom of this and I take a reading, my reading isn't going to be accurate. So I might have a false reading. I might not know it's done when it's done, or I might not have any idea how much alcohol is actually in here. Is that the biggest problem in the world? No. But part of the fun of home brewing is the science behind it, and I want to know what I'm getting out of it. I want to know how much alcohol is going to be in this when it's done. I want to know when it's done, what I could add to it, how much room I have to play with. The yeast is only going to work up to a certain amount of sugar. I'm using a 14% tolerance yeast today, and they'll probably dry this out. However, if I misread it and there's enough sugar to make 18% in here, 19% in here, the yeast might not start up. It might be too much sugar. It might shock them. Other bad things could happen. So I like to know. Okay, that looks pretty good. Next we're going to add our mushrooms. The rest, as I said, we're using 3 kinds of mushrooms today. 2 of them are strictly just there for flavor. And then the tea with no tea bag. The tea is important because it's going to give all those tannins to your wine. There's not a lot of body that's going to come from the mushrooms itself. So you really are depending on that tea to really round out the wine and give it a good mouthfeel. Alright, let's clean up and take a reading. So we're going to take a reading using our hydrometer. It's a 3-scaled hydrometer. And is it essentially necessary? I mean, you can get by without it if you really want to fight me on it. The thing is, especially with this recipe where it's in a bucket, is I'm assuming I put in enough water. I know I put in 3 pounds of honey. 3 pounds of honey in a normal gallon is going to give me a certain reading. And at the end, I'm going to hit just into that 14 to 16% alcohol range I look for in a mead. However, if I don't take a reading right now, I don't know. And there we go. 1.100. So I hit it directly on the mark of what I wanted. But a little bit more water might have lowered it. Not enough water might have raised it. I want to avoid that, and now I know how much is in here. But alright, now we can give it another good stir. When you stir this, try to splash it a little bit. At this point, you want to get some oxygen in your brew. It's really going to help it take off over the first few days. After that, you really want to avoid the whole oxygen thing. But since you don't get to play with your brew all that much during the fermentation, play around with it while you can. Alright, and today's yeast is a wine yeast. It goes to about 14% tolerance, and it's Lalvin 71B. You can use any wine yeast that's going to go between 14 and 16%. ABV, and it'll be fine for this particular mead. That's actually the range I like to go to for most of my meads. And we're only going to use half a packet. If you buy a local homebrew store and they have another yeast that they recommend, try it out. Different yeasts are meant to give different esters and different flavors to your final product. So you might find yeasts that give a more fruity note to it, or you might find something that makes it smell or taste a certain way. If you find something you really like, stick with that strain of yeast and you will always like your brews. But now our yeast is in. Give it one more good stir. And next, we're going to put a bucket on the lid. A little note about the buckets with their lids. They don't always give it a perfect seal. So if you don't see it bubbling over the first couple days, I'll go ahead and take the lid off and just check. Make sure it's actually working. It should look foamy. It should have all the signs of a fermentation in a glass jar. But yeah, just don't worry if it's not bubbling right off the bat. You can also try to seal it. Sometimes you just miss a little corner. But no big deal. So what happens next? I'm going to put this away in a cool, dark space. When I say cool, dark space, I mean somewhere in your house where it's between, let's say, 65 and 85 degrees. Somewhere where it's not going to be exposed to that much light. It is an opaque bucket, but still, you don't want to put it directly in front of a window where it's going to be beat on by sunlight all the time. And once it finishes fermenting through, it should take about 3 weeks or so. We'll be back to show you the next step. And we're back to the final facts. So today we made a mushroom mead inspired off of a mushroom wine, using 3 kinds of mushrooms: shiitake, oyster mushrooms, and regular button mushrooms. We cooked the button mushrooms and we left the other 2 raw. Added some honey, added some yeast, added some tea, and now we have mushroom mead in the making. Cannot wait to see how it comes out. So guys, thank you so much for watching today. If you have any ideas you want me to try, please leave them down in the comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, cheers.